Yeah, it's funny. In 1776, he is an enormously big government guy. But
Yeah.
in 2026, he's smaller government than anyone you'll ever see anywhere near Washington.
Isn't that it's so funny? And that's evidence of how far we've gone in the wrong direction.
I am not an investor, so nobody should listen to me. But if I was, I would analyze the psychology of the politicians who are really
Yes.
manipulating and distorting these markets. Why bother doing fundamental analysis when the real 800-pound, Godzilla is out there doing all the real moves? Usually Warren Buffett, I
Particularly
assume.
Warren Buffett. Yeah, absolutely. Warren Buffett has underperformed the S&P 500 every year for the last 20, right, since 2000, I think, for over 20 years, something like that.
Wow.
He's been a mediocre investor at best. And I would suggest the reason is because he does not understand the macroeconomic picture.
Yeah, it's funny. Novitiates or newbies or people who don't know anything about the game think it either must be super highly mathematical, and that's just how you approach every decision. Bring your slide rule and your calculus, or it's just all subterfuge and psychology and peering into the souls of your opponent and deciphering what that slight finger twitch means and owning them. And of course, there's elements to both, but they're much, 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 much smaller than most people think. In any given game, there is a basic strategy that you just go learn. Back in the old days, you sort of had to divine it over years and years, but now you can just go out and read a book or watch a video. And that baseline strategy takes into consideration all those highfalutin mathematical concepts you were talking about. It's good to know those two, but really it's just that. And then as you gain experience and a familiarity with human psychology in general and the particular person you're playing with, you will start adding tells to that.
All right. Welcome to episode 18 of the Phoenician League podcast. I'm your host, Joe Withrow. We're 18 episodes in. We've figured out half of what we need to know to do this stuff. Our goal is to figure out the other half by episode 50. So we'll see if we get there. But I'm thrilled to say we have a guest for this one. I'm joined by Adam Haman of Haman Nature. It's a prolific Substack podcast, articles on Austrian economics, libertarian philosophy. Adam does crossover shows with Bob Murphy fairly frequently. Just a wealth of information and resources. We'll link to the podcast below. But I'm a subscriber, and I can tell you that the stuff they put out, they're very prolific. Adam, you get what you're asking for when you sign up. So we'll put a link there. I'll encourage everybody to check that out. But Adam, just really appreciate you joining us today, man. How's everything?
Everything's fabulous, Joe. Nice to put a face to the name. I've been reading your stuff for a little while, and I think it's very, very interesting.
Thank you.
And yeah, this should be fun.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So I want to start right away by saying Adam is or was a professional poker player. Have you retired from that, or are you kind of always a professional poker player once you start?
Well, it's not a definition exactly,
Okay.
I sure haven't played in a while.
Okay.
I assume if I ever run out of money, I'll go back to it. But during COVID, I broke with a lot of stuff. I didn't watch sports anymore, and I got so disgusted with how my fellow citizens just rolled over and took it. In fact, even demanded compliance and government intervention. I just got so mad at everybody, and I don't know. I just didn't feel like I wanted to stop doing that. I was annoyed with the people I played with, and I wanted to start talking about more substantive things. So
Yeah. Well, I've got to tell you, so I've got a guy that's become a really good friend of mine. His name's Nate, and I met him in the Tom Woods School of Life, actually. But he's got a marketing background, and he's got just really a keen eye for details and branding and all that stuff. So he really helped me kind of get the Phoenician League launched a number of years ago. And I still meet with him pretty much every Friday, and he kind of gives me ideas and suggestions. And so he's been telling me for years that I should put out YouTube videos, and he's been telling me for years. And he's reminded me more recently that, the best ones are ones where you actually have a guest and you have a conversation, podcast, interview, whatever. So on Friday, I was chatting with him and I said, man, I'm finally going to take your advice. I'm a couple years late, but I've got Adam Haman coming, and I kind of shared a little information about your Substack and mentioned you were a poker player professionally. And he kind of perks up and he's like, well, does that mean like playing World Series of Poker, or what does that look like? So would you, and I don't know, I'm interested though. Would you share with us what life as a professional poker player looks like, and maybe how does one even go down that path? How did you get started there?
I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I was just saying this to somebody over dinner a couple nights ago. You have to be really, really talented at a lot of things to make it work. And if
Yeah,
I had put the time and dedication and discipline into owning a string of hot dog carts instead of
yeah,
poker, I would be a millionaire. And I'm not.
right.
So I fell into it just because when I graduated from Arizona State University with my finance degree, I thought having a stellar GPA would just mean I'd get hired right away.
Yeah,
That turned out not to be the case. I forgot to do all that bootlicking and networking and stuff. And
yeah,
so I just literally couldn't find a job. So I was already paying the rent playing cards at the local Indian casino. They just got in poker a couple years ago up there in Phoenix. And so I just kept doing it. I fell into it just because I'm already bringing money in. And I already
yeah,
sort of knew with my personality I was going to have trouble doing the corporate,
yeah,
climbing the ladder, playing politics. That was just going to be a problem.
yeah,
And so I just kept at it. And as far as what's it like, you have to approach it like an entrepreneur. You are your own boss. You need to manage your capital and time and resources effectively. And I focus mostly on cash games in response to your buddy's question. I've played plenty of tournaments, but I don't favor them. I
okay.
prefer the advantages of cash.
Will you share with us why?
Yeah, there's multiple reasons. One of the skills in a poker game is table selection, and you don't
Okay,
get that in a tournament. It's
okay,
also nice to just be able to pick up and leave whenever you want, and you're sort of strapped in until you bust
yeah,
out or win the
yeah,
thing in a tournament. Um, and although, of course, it's critically important to declare every penny you win to the tax man, in a tournament, they sort of don't rely on your moral character. They just issue you a W
they do it for
2G
you.
and
Oh
do it
gosh,
for you.
yeah,
So there were reasons to favor the one over the other in that regard. Um, I also, like in certain phases of a tournament, the depth of the stack becomes the most critical thing, and in a way that takes away all of your options. Like you'll
yeah,
find yourself doing shove fold things, and I'm a deep thinker of the game. I sort of always want to be deep,
yeah.
so that every arsenal in my playbook is available to me if I want to deploy it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think I shared with you back when I was in my 20s. But for about a year, I had a group of guys that I'd invite over, and we'd do poker night every Thursday, and we do Texas Hold'em tournament style. And I can't remember. We do the blinds would raise on a set schedule. I can't remember if it was 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it was. But I had I was terrible at it. But I found that if I just was ultra conservative, I could usually kind of outlast and maybe be second or third and give myself just a chance. But I'd always be the short stack towards the end. And so you get into a point where, you just have to you're dwindling fast because the blinds are up. And so the pot size is really the only consideration. So you're at a point where it's like, man, if I get like pair of threes, I just got to run with it, like all in, because I'm not going to survive another round. And so I never picked up any strategy or any like psychology. None of that. I just knew, well, and we'd be drinking beer and stuff too. So it was
Sure.
fun. So I just fold, just, let me go get another beer real quick. But, would you say, like, as far as tools and strategy, can you speak to that, like, very briefly at a high level? Like, is it more like probability and what hands to play and maybe when to fold and when to not fold? Or how much of that is psychology too? Like understanding, trying to get a read on the people at the table and maybe predict how they're likely to behave.
Yeah, it's funny. Novitiates or newbies or people who don't know anything about the game think it either must be super highly mathematical, and that's
Yeah.
just how you approach every decision.
Yeah.
Bring your slide rule and your calculus, or it's just all subterfuge and psychology and peering into the souls of your opponent and deciphering what that slight finger twitch means and owning them.
Yeah.
And of course, there's elements to both, but they're much, 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 much smaller than most people think.
Okay.
In any given game, there is a basic strategy that you just go learn.
Okay.
Back in the old days, you sort of had to divine it over years and years, but now you can just go out and read a book or watch a video.
Yeah.
And that baseline strategy takes into consideration all those highfalutin mathematical concepts you were talking about.
Okay.
It's good to know those too, but really it's just that.
Okay.
And then as you gain experience and a familiarity with human psychology in general and the particular person you're playing with, you will start adding tells to that.
Okay.
And realizing based on the particular weaknesses of your opponents when to deviate from strategy, basic strategy, for lack of a better term,
Okay.
because you want to play an exploitive strategy.
Okay.
So you would do something that, strictly speaking, makes you exploitable, but they're not doing that. They're making that other error. So,
Okay.
like if they always call you never bluff, just to simplify it to the most extreme.
Okay.
And if they'll fold, if you breathe on your chips, then you bluff a whole bunch, you know?
Okay.
So it's that.
That was me. I was the guy that would just fold, you know. So, I was probably easy to.
Well, you know, you were playing a truncated version of poker, you know, a single table sit and go or something like that. But you employed the right strategies. You probably were doing basically the right thing. I don't know how many positions you were playing. Usually it's 3 in a structure like that. But if you just fold your way into the money and then start making a educated guess on a coin flip or something, that's a pretty good idea.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's. I think it's fascinating because it's poker. I mean, especially back in. I'm trying to think. You know, maybe 15 years ago or so, it really kind of took off, and all of a sudden, it's like become an industry where people.
It was 03 specifically.
Okay.
ESPN had started covering the World Series of Poker on, I don't know, ESPN 8, the Ocho, or something like that.
Right.
And then the most unassuming guy named Chris Moneymaker, just some guy, just some accountant, happened to stumble fart his way through a field of absolute sharks and won the thing when the thing was being televised. And so if this guy can, you know, make millions playing this game, well, then everybody can. So it just exploded after that.
Okay. That's kind of analogous. The first thing I think of when I hear that was Bitcoin in 2017, when it first hit 20,000, and all of a sudden the news is running stories about some guy who put in 100 and now he's like a millionaire or whatever.
Right.
And so everybody who was didn't understand, you know, more unsophisticated, I guess, folks who were seeing this, they just thought, oh, well, I can do that too. If he can do it, I can do it. So let me get into Bitcoin here without understanding the basics or the fundamentals. It's very interesting. But that kind of comes into the human psychology piece. You know, I see it in the investment world. You know, psychology is a very big part of, you know, it's certainly in the equity markets. It depends on what assets you're looking at, but understanding psychology is a big piece of it. And it's something I think it's fascinating, because if you don't think about it, maybe you don't realize how nuanced human psychology can be.
Do you think technical analysis is a study in psychology rather than anything else? I mean, it's the opposite of fundamental analysis, right?
Yeah, there's merit to it to a degree. You know, I've seen guys with all kinds of trading systems, and they've got, you know, Fibonacci, and they've got all these like 18 lines on the thing, and they're drawing squiggles everywhere, and it's like that. No, like those guys, they'll get lucky from time to time, or maybe their system will work for 3 months and then it doesn't work anymore. But the basic technical analysis, where you look at where does like, if you're talking about a stock, where does it close? You know, how is it, you know, what's the candle? You look at the candlestick, and so you can see where did it open, where did it close, how did it trade in a given day, and you can look at volume. And, you know, there is some insight that you can derive from that. And the reality too is today, I don't know the exact number, but something like 80 to 85% of all trading activity is done by high frequency trading.
I thought it was higher than that.
It
honestly.
Probably is higher than that. I haven't looked at the numbers in years. So maybe it's 90% today. And so if those things are just going to trade based on how they're programmed. And so it's a fairly decent assumption that they're going to be programmed with whatever the standard technical analysis is. So in some ways it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I guess it's less human psychology today because it's just, well, I guess it's still psychology because it's people who are programming the AI bots, but yeah, there's some merit to it, but not nearly, like, it's at a very high level, I think. So
I am not an investor, so nobody should listen to me. But if I was, I would analyze the psychology of the politicians who are really manipulating and distorting these markets.
Yeah.
Why bother doing fundamental analysis when the real 800-pound, you know, Godzilla is out there doing all the real moves? And apparently some guy who's in the Trump administration knows that very well, because he's front betting these tweets.
Front running the tweets. Yeah. Apparently, you can buy access to front run the tweets.
That's right. I just heard that. Didn't hear how much.
I think 100K. 100K to get in the door.
My account isn't big enough to pay that. I don't think.
But yeah, that's absolutely understanding the macro picture. In fact, that's our approach at the Phoenician League. And there's a guy named Stanley Druckenmiller. As I was researching Kevin Warsh a little while back and trying to get a feel for who is this guy, who's, if anybody's not familiar with the name, the new Federal Reserve Chairman. And he actually worked for Stanley Druckenmiller's investment family office. Now, before that, Druckenmiller ran a hedge fund. And this guy, he actually, I forget the exact statistics, but he produced something like 30% plus annual or average 30% returns a year for like 30 years and never had a down year, which that might not sound like much. That is very impressive. But he's a macro guy. So he would look at policy and he'd say, okay, well, we can see the policies that they're pushing. Here's the logical conclusion. And this is a guy who was, in 2008, he was ranting and raving about the QE and about, Operation Twist. And he's like, God, this is going to be the greatest transfer of wealth from, the lower, like anybody who's not already a financial, plugged into the financial upper echelon of that system. Like it's going to transfer a massive, I think he called it the biggest transfer of wealth in history because of the QE, because, the dollar debasement. Like he called all of that. And so Warsh worked for this guy, worked at his family office, which I think is interesting. And so, but he, Druckenmiller, and if you ask people today, who's the greatest investor in history? What name will people say?
Usually Warren Buffett, I assume.
They say Warren Buffett. Yeah, absolutely. Warren Buffett has underperformed the S&P 500 every year for the last since 2000, I think, for over 20 years, something like that.
Wow.
He's been a mediocre investor at best. And I would suggest the reason is because he does not understand the macroeconomic picture. This guy was campaigning for Obama in 2007, 2008, right? And talking about, all the wealth the transfer stuff, all those things and saying, yeah, what would he say? Yeah, it's ridiculous. My secretary has a higher tax rate than me. And of course, if you actually looked at the raw number, she was paying almost nothing in taxes. It might have been a higher percentage of her income, but Buffett would, but he got caught up in the peak oil thing. He lost billions there. He got caught up in so many things where he has not understood where the puck is going because he doesn't have the right worldview when it comes to understanding the macroeconomy. So he's been really a very mediocre investor at best. When he was younger, he hit some his big secret was Berkshire Hathaway is fundamentally an insurance company. We acquired Geico. And so with an insurance company, it's property and casualty. And so, if you think of homeowners insurance or car insurance, you buy these policies and you pay for them every month, every 6 months, every year, whatever. And they only pay out if your house burns down or if you wreck the car or whatever. And, on the corporate side, commercial side, they're buying policies for all kinds of things in just the same way. And so the insurance company gets this money. They've got really good at knowing, okay, we're only going to have roughly this amount of claims this year. So then they invest the rest of that money. And so that was Buffett's secret. He was just getting essentially free money and investing it through the insurance thing. And he had a couple big ones early in his career, American Express, See's Candy, Geico. There might have been one or two others that were really good. And he's done almost nothing of value since. So
you'd also expect that just from a guy of his age. You'd expect him to be more tuned in to the way things sort of work when he's a much younger man and then just sort of stop paying attention.
Yeah, I guess when you become, just famously incredibly wealthy and never have to worry about money again, there's probably less of an incentive for you to.
If you're advocating for increased taxes for crying out loud, you've lost your competitive edge.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to ask you. So we actually met each other. You and Bob Murphy have done some critiques of the American System essay series, and I wanted to ask you, how did you come? So your worldview, you're well versed in Austrian economics, the libertarian philosophy. And that's the worldview I'm coming from as well. How did you get into this, as coming from the world of playing poker for a living? Did you always kind of have this mindset, or was there kind of a point where you, kind of started to discover some of this stuff and really get into it?
It was libertarianism first. I was raised non-political. My parents just never spoke about politics, I guess. So I just assumed... That was the polite thing back then, right? Yeah, or maybe they just weren't that interested.
Yeah.
I assumed I was a Democrat just because movies and TV said that's the non-evil one, right?
Yeah.
And then I get to college and immediately have the epiphany that the government doesn't have any resources. It doesn't produce anything.
Yeah.
In order for it to do the right thing with the money, it has to steal that money first. So I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, well, I'm a Republican then. So I listened to Rush Limbaugh for a couple months and then realized, no, whatever this is, I'm not that either. And then a buddy of mine shoved an Ayn Rand book in my hands, and it was The Fountainhead. And then I read Atlas Shrugged, and I knew exactly what I was. Even if she didn't like the name Libertarian, I knew precisely. And I read everything she had. And then I just sort of considered myself a baseline libertarian until I'd won a few hands, put a few months worth of rent in the bank so I didn't have to play poker 24/7. And I just started reading, Murray Rothbard and Mises and Hayek. And that's when I started getting interested in the Austrian school and realizing that Minarchism is having a state at all. Even a night watchman state is incoherent and unstable, and it will devolve. So I became an anarchist, libertarian anarchist.
Yeah, and that's, if anybody's not familiar with the underlying philosophy there, it's not just, what's the right way to put it? It's not just a reactive decision. Like there is an entire philosophical, economical framework that's been in place, and it's been built up over decades, that suggests how a society could be structured in such a way where the market handles anything, virtually any, if you want to call them civil services that government takes care of today. And I use that word very loosely because I don't know, in some cases it might not be the proper word for it, but
it's a fine word. We're a very social species, and we're going to do a whole bunch of things in a collective manner. The key, though, the original sin is putting monopolistic force behind any of that. All these things can be negotiated and by contract voluntarily, and it's just that government crowds it out. I mean, when I tell somebody that you don't need the government for anything, literally, their brain explodes, and it's no wonder the government grabbed them when they were 4 or 5 and threw them in a government school to teach them how great government was. It's no shock. But no, all of these things can be handled and coordinated in a voluntary manner just through supply and demand. And this is far too... I wrote a little article about it called Alex in Ancapville.
yeah,
And it just has a guy going through his day and how various things are happening without an overarching monopolistic state to handle conflict. I've just expanded that into a book. I'll be putting that out here in the next month or two. And it just shows in a narrative structure how wrong, how indoctrinated you are to think that government is essential. And in fact, if you think about it deeply, it poisons everything we try to give it as a task, which is going to come up if we start talking, you and I, about the American system, because you'll find I'm going to carry that analysis through.
Yeah, and it's you hit on something there. I'll just try to state it as plainly as I can, and that is, if you look at this system, it is the only one that I've explored that is philosophically consistent, and that it does not have any inherent contradictions. And you kind of mentioned you start out, you think in the kind of.
I guess there are others, like a pure monarch. You got to do everything I say. I guess that's consistent.
But,
pure communism. I guess it's consistent.
That's a good point. So I guess compared to if you just look at whatever the Democratic Party, their policies, if you go through their policies, you're going to find some that are contradictory to each other. You're also going to find some that are contradictory to what they say they believe in. And it's the same with Republican Party, just in different areas. And so that's one of the attractive things about the libertarian philosophy is it is a consistent, non-contradictory framework. And so I find this stuff fascinating. I know a lot of people, kind of their eyes might glaze over when you try to think about or talk about some of these things. But I think it's, for me coming at it from the investment standpoint, understanding this stuff, I think is a strategic advantage. But the key is, at least in my experience, you have to be able to be objective. Yeah. And you have to be able to look at it and say, okay, instead of saying, here's all the reasons why that's wrong or that's bad or, whatever, you've got to be able to say, okay, well, what are they doing? This is what they're doing. What's the logical conclusion? And
it should give you an incredible ability to see around corners because you'll see the stated goal can't work. So there should be obvious repercussions from that. But as you well know, the damn market can be irrational for longer than your supply of ammunition holds out. So
That
And
is
I
true.
and everybody thought that hyperinflation was coming after '08 and what they did there.
Yeah,
And we were just wrong. And
yeah.
I still think it's right around the corner, but I'm astonished that we continue to limp along.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, maybe we're jumping too far ahead, but in the analysis I've done, the Trump's economic people, they seem to understand we're at the end of the road. Like
Everybody knows that. Everybody
yeah,
honest knows that.
anybody who's honest knows that. And I think I'm sure the Keynesians, I think at some level they've got to know this too, even though they keep pushing the same policies. But if
Well,
you
you
look at
look
this,
at you look at the MMTers even, the modern
yeah,
day
yeah,
Keynesians, and there is an asterisk at the end of all their nonsense that says, of course, hyperinflation might, be an
yeah,
actual limiting principle on you can just
yeah.
print your way out of anything.
But the MMT guys is what is it? Modern market
Modern monetary
monetary
theory.
theory.
Yeah.
And there was a guy like Warren something or other was the kind of the main guy, but they are correct in how they explain how the monetary system works. They just say, okay, well, let's use this. Like this is how. So let's use it to do these things. But I don't. When I looked at it, it's been years since I looked at it. But I think they did accurately explain how the system works. It was just their policy proposals.
I remember thinking that for a while. I think Bob Murphy did an episode or an article or both specifically addressing things they didn't get right as far as
Okay.
like from an accounting perspective even.
Okay.
But it is true that a lot of the things they say that seem crazy right off the bat aren't actually crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's legal counterfeiting,
Yeah.
and backed by the fact that if you don't use our funny money, we'll shoot you. You can go a long way with that.
Yeah.
It turns out.
Yeah, and I think they were correct. I mean, they were correct too in their assessment. I'm trying to remember; it's been a while, but taxes essentially they were saying taxes somehow pull money out of the system, although that's not entirely correct because if those taxes just go to somebody else and the money's still there. But paying down debt does pull money out of the system, like you have because money is based on debt. So the more debt you have, the more dollars in circulation. Pay down debt; those dollars, they disappear.
It's definitely the thing I would say if I was running a counterfeiting press in my basement and I was making my money not just by spending it, but by loaning it out and collecting the interest.
Yeah.
I'd say, like, well, you can't do this without me. Look at all these loans that would never gotten made.
Yeah.
Those loans shouldn't have been made, and you stole the money from
You're-
under people's mattresses in the act of making those loans.
Yeah, and that's your underwriting is going to be poor in that scenario. And I think
Why bother?
yeah, exactly, and I think that's a good segue into the American system. If you want to talk about that for a little bit, because I was very surprised when I started the research. I started doing this, going down this path, doing the research mainly because I started to see the kind of the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and a couple other guys, economic guys in the Trump administration. If you just all you do is look at Trump's tweets, like they just look erratic. But these guys would go out and do these, their stupid, all the speeches and policy things and whatever that up to this point, the previous administrations, those things would just be, Fed speak, no real information. But I started to notice, going through these policy papers, these guys are different in the sense that they do seem to advocate an economic strategy that's different from the standard globalist Keynesian thing that we've had. And they keep name dropping Alexander Hamilton and they name drop the American system. And so I keep seeing this. I'm like, well, I need to learn about this. What is this? Because I knew very little of substance about Hamilton. I know a lot about Jefferson. I'm in Virginia. I've been to Monticello. I've read his biography. I've gone through a lot of stuff when Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom, which I think is just a phenomenal program that he put together. So I knew the Jeffersonian side. And for anybody who doesn't know, Hamilton and Jefferson were political rivals. So they had different visions and they were very competitive at the political level at America's founding. So I didn't know Hamilton's side though. I just read, he's he just wants big government. He's an advocate of centralized power, all these things. And so reflexively, those of us who favor, more the libertarian thing would just reflect, oh, he's a terrible guy. And we just kind of assume he's going to be exactly like the guys we see today. And as I started to research, I found I don't think that's correct. He did certainly advocate a strong central government. He did want a powerful federal government, but it wasn't because he wanted, to do the things that we're doing today. In fact, he was very clear, government should not print money. The federal government should not permit. We need sound money that's backed by specie, which is gold and silver. He was very clear: no income tax. Like, we don't want to tax our people. No regulatory apparatus to speak of. So he wasn't in favor of the stuff that we see people pushing, big government policies in favor of today.
Yeah, it's funny. In 1776, he is an enormously big government guy. But in 2026, he's smaller government than anyone you'll ever see anywhere near Washington.
Isn't that, it's so funny. And that's evidence of how far we've gone in the wrong direction. Yep. But that surprised me. And then I started to look at, well, he wanted a central bank, right? And of course, we assume that that's going to be exactly like the central banks we know today are, inflating the currency and making floating asset bubbles and transferring wealth, all the things they're doing. But that was not the case. He said that we need the central bank because we want to direct credit towards productive activity. We want to make sure credit gets to manufacturing and, the various things like this, and not too much speculation, like not too, we don't want too much luxury consumption, whatever. Now, there was no dictates or mandates. It was just, he just seemed to have this idea that he wanted to imprint that kind of framework into the American financial system. But, in that system, and this gets back to the underwriting thing, the money, any credit created would be based on real savings because it's sound money. Nobody's creating money from nothing. And so that puts a limit to how much credit you have. And when the credit is limited, you do have to be diligent about, if you're a lender, you've got to be diligent about who you're going to lend money to and what it's for. And you've got to make sure that they're going to be able to pay it back. And so you get to fast forward to today, and we've got a system where, fractional reserve system, which it's not even fractional reserve anymore. Like, it was like 10 to 1. Meaning banks could lend out 10 times more dollars than what they had on reserves. In 2020, they removed that restriction.
They just removed it.
It's gone.
Bob Murphy says it all the time. It was just in a footnote to a thing. It's like nobody knew it happened.
And I don't think that's changed.
I don't think so, no.
In that environment where you can just create massive amounts of credit, you don't have to worry too much about, well, are they going to pay it back or not? Because, if you can make your money now, and then especially if these losses will be effectively socialized as they were in 2008, you don't have to worry about it. But Hamilton's system was fundamentally different, which surprised me. And I think as I started to get into the research, I tried to figure out, well, why does he believe this? Why is he thinking about this? And the guy seemed to be obsessed with Britain. He was obsessed with this idea that we've got political independence now. We've got an American independent political entity, but we don't have economic independence, because everything's that we need other than we had plenty of food. We were a nation of farmers. So we've got all the food we need, but we've got to buy everything else from Britain. And they've got the capital markets. So all those goods are priced in London. And they've got the insurance companies, and the insurance is priced in London. And they've got the shipping companies. So it's your British shipping companies. So we got to pay all these people and import their stuff, and we're going to send them our money. And he just had this view, and that we should be making our own stuff here, and we need to have secure supply chains. And I know you and Bob have kind of looked at that from the economic standpoint, and you've looked at it, and you've kind of assessed how, the market could handle some of these things. And, you could have a domestic manufacturing industrial base kind of come about naturally. But what I was really fascinated was Hamilton wasn't making the argument that this is the best way to run your economy. He was making the argument that we got to do this now, because if we don't, Britain's going to come back and, I don't know if it's like take us over explicitly, or they're just always going to be exploiting us. And so, one can debate whether or not that would have happened, but he seemed to actually believe that, which I think is interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to do the impossible and psychologize a guy in the distant past. I have no basis for doing this, but obviously a man who just literally fought in a war against Britain is going to be a bit Britophobic and not want to have us have anything to do with them.
Yeah.
So I think that colored his analysis. I think as Bob Murphy and I talked about, I think he was wrong about that. I think he's just not getting it. He's bringing in a preference. I don't want to trade with these people.
Yes.
And I can't overlook the fact that there was cronyism right there. He's in New York, and he knows exactly who's going to be holding these states' debts bought at pennies on the dollar that he's going to issue, have the government pay par for him, pay face value. So if you know that's coming, if you're in fact advocating for that, you and your friends are going to benefit enormously. And I assume there's that sort of similar cronyism on the infrastructure projects. Even
Oh
if
yeah,
you genuinely believe that this is a thing government should do and these are essential, there's still ways to profit if you're on the inside. And humans being what they are, I'm sure that happened.
yeah,
But it wouldn't even probably, he probably wouldn't even think you could have an unsound money. That was just in the air.
yeah.
Obviously,
Well, he
money's
saw
sound. What are you going to
hyperinflation
do?
with the
Yeah, and he
continental
saw
dollar.
that. Yeah,
He,
exactly.
he knew what happened when money was not sound. So
And as far as the parallels to today, I'm sure there's some sort of a global. We are the spoils, and we are being fought over by nationalist predators and internationalist predators. And I guess if I was forced to choose between the two, I would choose the nationalist ones, I guess.
yeah.
But I don't believe Besant and others when they say they have my best interest at stake. I think they're playing a bigger game. It's not like they're going to give us little bits and pieces of the American system. We're going to get the tariffs, but we're not getting rid of the income tax. Or
Yeah.
not getting rid of this inflationary Federal Reserve. They're definitely not going to have sound money. So what does it mean when you slip in a plank here or there? Somebody will benefit. It's not going to be the American people, I'd argue, for all the economic reasons Bob Murphy would lay out. And I just think it's a big power play, and we're all being sort of duped into cheering for one side or the other when it really doesn't matter that much.
So that brings up an idea it's been rattling around in my head, and I'd love your reaction to this. And let me contextualize it first by saying, when you look and you mentioned, the different planks of the American system, we're so far in the other direction today that it's, sound money was like the most important element. As was, not having the ability to create credit out of nothing.
Many people argue, sorry to cut you off, but many smart
Yeah.
people argue if you just fix the money, everything else would
Fix
basically
money,
take
fix the
care of
world.
itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they were clear about that, and they were clear too with the tariff structure. They said this explicitly. Not only Hamilton, but some of the later American system economists, they were very clear. Like, tariffs are a tool. You're trying to incentivize your domestic manufacturing companies, and so tariffs raise the cost of foreign imports. We understand that. We're not saying and they were clear like this. We're not saying this is the ideal way to run the economy. We're not saying this, we know that this is going to cause some misallocations of resources. We know comparative advantages exist. We're just saying you got to do this first to get your own industrial base in good shape. And then when you do that, that's when the tariffs come down and you can compete, on the global scale with free markets. And so they were clear about that. Of course, what happened was the tariffs, it created the special interest groups. And so they created lobbyists and they, well, no, what do you mean tariff?
I was just about
Take
to
away
say.
my tariff.
I was just about to say, your story sounds an awful lot like the neocons when the Soviet Union was a threat, right?
Yeah.
Like, of course we want free markets we don't want an empire, but we've got this globe-spanning threat, this communist menace. So we have to curtail a republic in order to defeat it. But as soon as that's defeated, obviously we're going to go back to being a republic and peaceful and disband the empire. Except 1991 already happened, and we saw what they actually do. Once you give political power to these people, the crisis is never going to be over. We'll find another crisis.
That's the corruption element. So let's set that aside though. That's practical reality. I just want to suggest, setting that aside for a minute. If you look at the American system and you say, we've got sound money, and you say we've got, a system where we're only going to have tariffs for as long as we need to build out our industrial base. And if with that logic being the case, it would also make sense if you only have a central bank to help you get manufacturing going. The same logic would say, okay, well, at that point, we pull down the tariffs, we can privatize the central bank too, which Hamilton's bank, First Bank of the United States, I think it was 80% private and 20% was owned by the federal government. So it'd be easy to sell off the remaining 20%. Now you've got a purely private banking system, right? So by the same logic, you've got that. And what they're saying, if you think about this holistically, the American system is a transitional system. It's a system to get from where you are today to this end goal that you state is desirable. But it doesn't explain what in any comprehensive fashion, what's it look like here? Other than saying tariffs come down, they never really fleshed out, what's it look like now if you're successful? And so the idea I have, it just jumps out at me. It's like, well, if you take this as the case, if you're starting from sound money, and you pull out down tariffs, pull down central bank. Well, effectively, you've almost got the Austrian system. Now you've still got, a centralized state and things like that, but you've got something that looks a lot more like the Austrian system at the end of the American system if they do in fact pull these things back. And what's your reaction to that idea? And the reason I bring it up is it's like, if we're thinking about, if we're thinking about it strategically, what if somebody made that point? Do you think that somebody who firmly was a true believer in the American system stuff, would that resonate with them? I don't know, but what's your reaction to that?
Well, you said sound money right at the beginning, and again, that's almost a cure-all. If we could get that, obviously most of this other stuff goes away. But I think Hamilton was wrong about forwarding his version of the infant industry phenomenon. I don't believe it's true that you make yourself wealthier by raising tariffs. It might make more sense if, like, you had a choice between an income tax and funding the necessary functions of a federal government by using just a flat tariff.
Yeah, and some of the American system guys did advocate. They were very clear. Sure. Tariffs are what should fund the federal government, not income. Sure. So they were very clear about that.
I'd be against that too, because I'm a radical. But if those are my choices, one is obviously better than the other.
It's an easy choice to make. Yeah.
Right, but I think the people who say that's what made the American industrial, what made us grow as an industrial power are just wrong.
Okay.
They overlook the fact that we did have sound money, and we did have no income tax, and we did have very low regulations, and we did have a very entrepreneurial American spirit, whatever that ethos was, that culture.
Yeah.
And that is going to, I think we developed in spite of all those big government things that were done. If it made sense to, well, go back and listen to the way Bob Murphy explains it, but there's no scenario where you can say, if it made sense for a government to do some sort of a policy, to impose it by force, on a free market, if that actually did make sense, you'd have every incentive for private actors to do those things. And he gives an example like if your uncle died and left you a whole bunch of acres of forest land, and you marched up there and said, forest land, I guess I'll chop down these trees or lease the property to loggers, and I'll have a stream of income. It wouldn't make any sense for some politician to go, what are you, nuts? You're just going to cut trees like some rube? No, you got to get in here and put up tariff barriers and build a steel factory. Forget the division of labor. You need to be self-sufficient. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
If it made sense, you'd do that. And New York doesn't get richer by having trade barriers against Pennsylvania.
Right.
None of these
the
things.
The American system guys, they were clear about that, though. They said you have to have free trade internally.
Sure.
Because everything to them was about national economy. So internally, free trade. They were clear about that. But your principle is correct, though. What you're saying.
I think that national boundary thing really clouds our thinking. Like if we did have an anarchist system, anarcho-capitalism, where everything was voluntary, you'd still have regions and people who felt, culturally,
and
for
all
sure.
That stuff. Yeah.
But you wouldn't have national aggregated GDP numbers. Like it wouldn't even make
GDP
any sense.
Is such a flawed number. Anyway.
Even if it didn't, if it was GNP or something, or some other, whatever Gene Epstein says is the right way to do it, or maybe it's Mark Skousen. I can't remember. But no matter what, it deciding on some arbitrary line and deciding, am I doing better or worse according to those people over there?
Yeah.
Remember the basic thing of economics. As long as the exchanges are voluntary, ex ante at least, both parties won just from trading without producing anything.
Yeah. And that's, if you look at the world they lived in, it probably did make more sense to fixate on national stuff than it does today. I mean, today we've got multinational corporations, like any product, anything in the world, whether it's your phone, I don't care what it is, any physical thing you have is probably touched at least a handful of different countries somewhere along its supply chain. Like it's, and then we're getting into the thing where you've got some of these massive multi-trillion-dollar companies that, it's the lines are blurred as to what is national economy today. It's very hard to even say, aside from, people living in a physical geographic space. But that's a good point.
I do like your argument, by the way. I mean, the strongest argument is if you have to pick between Klaus Schwab and whatever the Bank of England or Bank of London is doing, or some sort of a being preyed upon by the same group, but at least they're Americans. I guess you could say maybe give me the American one, but like I'm never going to advocate for that because I think it's all wrong. I think we actually need free markets and free people, and until we get that, everything else is just. I think it's a grift. I think when they want high tariffs, they just want to find another way to screw us.
Well, we know there's corruption. I mean, I do think they are sincere in that they want to extract the U.S. from like this globalist apparatus.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And if you look at it, from an economic standpoint, and again, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm not suggesting that we do so. I'm just thinking more as an objective analyst. I read through the Schwab's Great Reset paper in 2020, and I read they had a framework there. They had the things like we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. But those guys, their entire thing, and you listen to those and some of the videos of them, like they call people like useless eaters. The great unwashed. Like there was a guy, what was his name? Yuval Harari. He got famous. He wrote a book called Homo Sapiens. Probably, what was that? It's like 2012, 2013. And it got, I think it was probably a bestseller. And I had people recommending it to me. And I read that book and he documented the history of the human race, and was it right or not? I don't know. But something was always off about it as I was reading it. And I realized afterwards what was off about it is his view was that humans are animals. We are no different from any other animal. And that was that. And so how they talk, that's how they see us.
If Satan walks the earth, he was whispering in the ears of guys like Thomas Malthus and Paul Ehrlich and every blue-haired liberal fool who literally thinks that the earth is a great place, if not for humans.
Yeah, if we
are the cancer upon this earth. That's pure poison.
Yeah, those people have never been to a place like where I live, because I can hike up this mountain right here and I will not see just pure pristine nature for miles and miles. You're not going to see any. I see deer more than I see people. But
just get on a plane, fly across the country.
See how massive this country is, let alone the world.
Plus, the great thing about free markets, if we actually had them, is if we ever did get to a carrying capacity limiting principle sort of a thing, prices would be all we would need to recognize that and incorporate that into our behavior. Yeah.
But to contrast the World Economic Forum guys with the American system guys, I would say at least the American system people say we need to have a strong middle class because we need our guys buying the manufacturing stuff that we're making. So they might see us as economic tools, and I don't think that that's the highest and best way to view other humans, but it is better than seeing them as useless eaters. That's objectively clear. And so I do appreciate that. Thank you for not considering me useless. You need me to buy your stuff. Okay. And I'll buy some of it if it's good.
I guess that's a step up. I'd rather work in the gulag than just be put up against the wall and shot, I guess.
And I will say too, they never advocated that I've seen. They didn't advocate that the government should force private business to do anything. But what they did, they had the tariff system, and then they had Hamilton had a bounty system, which, that was taking tax revenue and giving it to manufacturing companies. And they do the same thing today. They're taking equity stakes in companies.
About 30, according to a Forbes article I just read. The Trump administration, because the CHIPS Act exists, says, hey, why are we just handing out this money? Why don't we allow me to wet my beak?
Yeah. And
so, now the government, it's like literal fascism when the government owns pieces of private companies, meaning they're not so private. I guess I like Intel's future a lot better now that I know that the government has a reason to pass laws to make sure that Intel does well.
Yeah. Intel was not, they were on a bad trajectory.
I know.
So this happened.
I know. And it gets meddled too because it gets conflated with a national security interest.
Yeah.
The government needs to have a policy to make sure that we not only can have steel, but we have processors and all the stuff that goes into drones and all this high-tech stuff, which makes the thing more complicated. But again, the great Bob Murphy will tell you, your procurement policy doesn't need to be your economic policy. That is an inefficient way to do that.
Yeah. But I think that, and this brings me back to the idea that I'm really, I don't know if it's important or not, but I think it is in a sense that the American system it's transitional in nature. Now, these guys are approaching it as if, and everybody I've seen that advocates, and I've started to, I've now become aware of the people who are out there who are, really advocating this stuff, but they are fixated in this. It's almost like the paradigm they expect a permanent conflict to always exist. It's always us versus them. And so we have to have these policies. And if I look, and I've done the research on Hamilton and on some of these guys like Friedrich List and Harry Carey. Was it Harry or Henry? Whichever one.
I can't remember.
They were clear that these are transitional policies. Like, we're going to roll this stuff back. And I think that's been lost on the people who kind of come across this stuff in the modern version.
It's in there.
It's important to raise. What do you think?
I think it's a great point. I can't help but notice that it's in the interest of the implementers of these things for it never to be temporary.
Yeah.
Like if Ron Paul had not been cheated, or the public, followed him, and if he'd won the presidency, I do believe he's one of the very few humans on this earth who would have done transition and made the government smaller, assuming nobody JFK'd him or something.
And he had a plan for doing that.
Yeah, he did.
For those who didn't read it, I think, what do you call it? Restore America Now, something like that. And I read through it.
Yeah, it was his campaign book, his first one, and it was really good. And it had to do with restraining spending, controlling the central bank, auditing it first and foremost, pulling back the empire, and using that money, those savings, to try and wean people off the entitlement system.
Yeah,
and then repeal regulation, if you could do it that way. But the thing about politics is it corrupts the soul. And it's not an accident that no one not named Ron Paul, I don't have any faith that they would do that. I don't know, maybe Thomas Massey.
So that's what made, that's how I discovered Ron Paul just by chance. But that's what really made it, what caught my attention was, they were trying to say he was crazy and everything. Well, I actually took the time to read his stuff. I was like, oh, this seems like this could work. Like, why aren't we doing this? This
if you
makes
actually listen to him and read him, that'll cure you.
But that's, there's massive power structures, interests out there who want people to not actually read and think and analyze.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's very important. That's also why I wanted to take the time to research the American system, because I wanted to understand it from an objective perspective.
Yeah, I think I've said it on the show, but kudos to you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So good, in fact, that I came at you kind of hard on our first episode analyzing. It's like, this guy, he writes well, but he's all mixed up. He can't just be advocating for this stuff.
And I appreciate that, because I needed to see it. Number one, you guys raised a couple points that I did not, and I should have. And that is, well, hold on, these guys had a classical gold standard. They didn't have an income tax, didn't have a regulation. Like, how can you say that these policies these are what caused, the great, industrial expansion in the U.S., and excluding all these other things that were happening? That's a common economic fallacy.
If I could make a bet with God,
I did make it
in a time machine or something, I'd bet that we would have done better without all that, given all the advantages we had. This enormous free trade system with great people and sound money, that you can go a long way with that.
And even if you didn't have the rapid industrial expansion, and you probably wouldn't if it had to come about organically, you still wouldn't get in. This is what we've covered in the American System series. We looked at, well, how did this thing get corrupted? Because I do think that Hamilton had he believed, he was convicted in his ideas.
I believe
and
that,
he did seem to have, I think he had the interest of American citizens in mind. I don't think that he was, a bad guy. And
he just fought a war for good reasons, and he was just still carrying all that with him. Damn it, we need to be independent. I get that.
Yeah, so I think that's a nuance. But without that, even if you didn't industrialize as fast, you wouldn't get into the corruptions that we've covered with the tariff system, and then with the, some of these things. We kind of made the connection in the essay series that there was a contingent of people that they were the Republican Party at the time. This was the American System Party at the time of Lincoln, and even a little before that. Or actually, whenever it came about, there was a Whig Party, and I think Republicans came about. That was somewhere around the time of Lincoln. Anyway, a faction of the Republicans split off and said, no, we're going to vote for the income tax because this tariff thing is so corrupt. We can't do this anymore. And so, maybe we never get an income tax. I mean, who knows? I mean, the other thread we're kind of exploring is there's been international interests that have been kind of integrated into the American political system for, at least 120 some years now, if not more than that. And it might be more. This is interesting. And I'm going to, hopefully try to get some more insight onto this. I
was just reading a little bit about the reasons we are saving the Japanese yen, which just gets me thinking about, the reserve currency system and just the incredible entanglements. The real reason Gaddafi had to go. I don't think this. Let me just ask you what you think. Do you think
Sure.
this can be? We can change policy and get ourselves out of it without a collapse?
So let me answer it this way. I feel as an objective analyst, I'm looking at it like, what are they doing? And what's the logical conclusion of this? Rather than should they be doing this, like that, I've developed the ability to set that aside. And that's helped
Sure.
me. So what they're doing right now, they understand it's the end of the road. If you look at the stablecoin thing, I see everybody out there saying, oh, stablecoin is just another central bank digital currency, CBDC by another another name. And it could become that in the future. That's not what they're doing. The stablecoin thing is about re-dollarizing the world and trying to get dollars into places that they've never been. And so with this, and the stablecoin, because they passed the law, I think it was the Genius Act, that says if you issue a stablecoin, you must back it 1-to-1, and U.S. Treasuries must be I forget if there's a percentage that must be in there, but U.S. Treasuries are the primary backing. So when they issue a stablecoin, that stablecoin issuer, if somebody buys it, they turn around, they take the money that they get and they buy treasuries. So they've created demand for U.S. debt. And so what they're doing thus far is not fixing the underlying problem, but looks like they're trying to, I think they are betting on, can we get this AI thing ramped up? Can we increase our productivity massively? Can we outgrow this debt thing? It looks like that's what they're betting on. Now, at first I was optimistic when they get Doge in there and they were out there and Musk is saying, yeah, we're going to cut, at first he was saying 2 trillion. And he's been on the record saying, man, there's 1.5 trillion just in fraud. Like not even the stupid stuff that we might rail against, just outright fraud. And at first I was like, okay, well, if we can cut that, like if you cut 1.5 trillion, this thing can go on for decades. Just do that right away. And that with the stablecoin thing. But it looks like they've lost all interest. If there ever was any interest.
Baked into my question was the fact that we had a Doge. Yeah. And apparently political will to do things. And it's the darndest thing. It just never went anywhere.
Never went anywhere. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't in the future. The idea's out there. So I'm not going to say just because this one failed, it could never work again. That would be kind of the black pill view. Although you can say, well, this one didn't work. So it's, next time it happens, maybe I won't get so excited if it were to happen again. But anyway, to point it out. So I don't know if they'll be able to continue kicking down the can down the road. I think they will for the time being, especially if they continue to act on some of these policies of extracting the U.S., like decoupling U.S. financial, monetary policy, economic policy from the globalist stuff. That's what, there was something that rolled out in 2018. There was something called the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, or SOFR, which people's eyes would roll back.
LIBOR, yeah.
It replaced LIBOR, but they phased it in over 4 years. In 2022, SOFR replaced LIBOR permanently in the U.S. What's substantive about that is LIBOR was just a rate set by bankers in London. SOFR is a rate that's set based on market activity in the Treasury repo market. So fundamentally it's a market-based rate. I mean, you could argue, should there be a market for
if you ignore the thing they're trading?
Yes, if you set that aside, you could argue, well, is that really a market? But there is some element of market. It's not manipulated. It's not something that's set. And if you look at when Jerome Powell started hiking interest rates extremely, it was in 2022. And it was only when SOFR rolled out. So everybody was screaming, always inflation and all that stuff. I look at it, and if you look at some of the things, so Powell did a conference, I think it was late 21, where he's up there with Christina Lagarde, the head of the ECB, and there's a couple other, the globalist central bankers. And ever since 2008, I mean, Bernanke said, this is the era of globally coordinated monetary policy, central bank policy. Like, we're going to collaborate with each other mainly to kill the dollar and kill interest rates and make sure they never get off the ground. But anyway, there was a conference and Lagarde gets up there and she's like, yeah, and it's really essential that central banks work together to fight climate change. That's going to be the biggest pressing issue. And they go around and each of the other Europeans are like, yeah, we're going to get that climate change. And then Powell gets up there and he says with a straight face, he says something to the effect of, I'm estimating here, but he said something like, yeah, I mean, the Federal Reserve, I've got a dual mandate. And we can mock the dual mandate, but he said, I've got, 2% inflation and, sustainable employment, however they put it. I don't think it's the Fed's job to enact social policy, associating climate change with social policy. And you could see the steam coming out of Christina Lagarde's ears Like she was enraged. Like this is not supposed to happen. We're supposed to be on the same team. But it was clear that there was some type of break. The other thing I'll mention that I think is relevant to this, I read just from the investment world. I read J.P. Morgan, CEO Jamie Dimon's annual letter every year, not to, just to see what's this guy saying. And up until I want to say 2021, this guy would just kind of repeat the same wokish globalist platitudes that everybody else repeated at that time. In 2021, all of a sudden, he's calling himself a red-blooded American capitalist. And he's saying, well, we need to fund oil and gas, and we need to have a strong manufacturing base. And and all these things that were dirty words.
Well, he's reversing the Joe Biden policy. I mean, one of the good things we did get from Trump is we're finally producing fossil fuels.
Yeah. The energy policy.
He failed on, I think, every other thing.
That one's definitely in
Trump
motion.
did give us that. As bad as the inflation is now, the cost of everything now, it could have been worse if we were still trying to prop up Solyndra? Or whatever those nonsense green policy companies are.
I think it went bankrupt pretty quick anyway.
Of course it did. It's just fraud.
Yeah. My point with that, though, is it looks to me, just looking at these things, these are just breadcrumbs. But putting them together, it looks to me like there is some type of faction, like power faction in the U.S. that said, okay, now we can't do this anymore. We've got to stop because we've got to, change course. And will they be successful? I don't know. But I do think that they're buying time.
Do you think they will exist after Trump's presidency?
That is the big question, isn't it?
Because I think, I've said it on my show, maybe you've heard it, I think Trump cannot extract himself from this Middle East quagmire because he's a man he has the foibles of an egomaniac politician, and none of the other ones have, and he can't either. So prices will go up, and Americans vote based on their pocketbooks, which means the Democrats win the Congress this year, and the presidency, it'll be President Newsom probably, in 28, which means they're going to come in with their leftist, green, woke DEI vengeance and reverse everything good Trump did, what little there was, and just absolutely screw this country over. Just
if
ruin
that happens, we are in trouble. Because what Trump has done is he has blown through whatever unspoken limits existed to the American executive.
That's right. I don't know if we get to the end of Trump's term before the currency collapses.
I do think J.D. Vance would actually be pretty decent, though. He seems to have the temperament.
I don't think a Republican can win.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's going to determine everything.
The coalition that Trump
that politics should be determinative like that. I think it will be because they have so much power and control now over things at a macro level. And I always want to qualify that by saying, I think we have a lot of agency in our life personally. I think at the local level, we can impact things positively. And I think we should be trying to do that in whatever way. I read a book. Did you ever read Economics and the Spiritual Life of Free Men by, what was the author's name? He's been dead for years. I think he was writing in like the 60s. Hinser Spieth. But it's a fantastic book. It gets a little dense because it's written in prose of that era. But he makes the point that, when we talk about economics, what we're talking about fundamentally is a system of a division of labor that allows people to pursue their own interests, that allows people to engage in productive activity without anybody forcing them to do so. It allows people to transact with each other, to collaborate with each other without having to know the person personally. Like trust is incentivized just at the system level. Not
you get lower time preference, you get higher trust societies. It's all pro-civilization.
And his point is, look, we are building the kingdom of heaven right now. And by doing what we're doing in the private markets and enabling this flourishing to occur, and we've largely conquered scarcity, to a degree. And I believe that's true. You're never going to fully eradicate scarcity, but in the sense that the poorest people in the U.S. today have flat phones and flat screen TVs and, eat as much food as they, probably waste more food than they eat. We have conquered scarcity in that sense. And he would contrast that with, look at the political means. The political means is a zero-sum system where you necessarily you have winners and losers, but it is so anathema to what we're doing in the private markets. And he was trying to get people to see, like, we could have this model for everything. There's no reason why it couldn't exist. But I loved his perspective on that. And I do think in the sense that we can go out in our local communities and do whatever, even if it's just helping the old lady or maybe going and visiting her, whatever somebody wants to do that makes a little improvement. if everybody had that mindset that I'm just going to do something small, that something small could multiply, you know, a million times over, you know. And that was a whole Jesus thing when he would talk about sowing seeds, and like the seeds that fell on good ground, they'd multiply what, sixfold, 600-fold, whatever. Like, same idea. You know, little things add up to big things if they can compound. So anyway, I said they have all this power and control. I don't want to suggest that they're omnipotent. They're certainly not omniscient. And so I don't want to ever discourage anybody. You know, I'm very, very positive, and I want to make sure that I convey a positive.
I'm glad you emphasized that. I've been dropping a lot of black pills, but I should say I agree with you. The difference between the sphere of the private and the sphere of the political is night and day. I think one is good, literally, and the other is evil. So to the extent that you can, in your own personal actions, do good things in that private sphere. Yeah. And I also, I think this system will collapse. I think statism is not the end political result for our species. We just barely came out from the caves and down from the trees. We made a bunch of wrong turns, and I think kings were a wrong turn, so are nation states. I think in the end of the day, if we don't blow each other up, and even a couple thousand years after we do, I think the end state of human civilization, if we continue to exist, is political anarchy. And everything voluntary, and that's how you get peacefulness, that's how you get productivity. And it's amazing what we've managed to achieve, even though the government expands every year and continues to strangle us. And still we manage to actually literally make more with less, because the human ingenuity and the technological process makes that happen.
We've been running with like first one hand tied
behind
back,
and then two, hopping on one. Yeah.
I do want to I'm going to mention this though, just for somebody who might not be familiar. You know, political anarchy. Adam's not referring to like violent uprisings or anything like that. He's referring to a sound philosophy of non-aggression, non-intervention. Everything should be voluntarily chosen. Every action people take should be voluntarily chosen. Nobody should be forcing anybody to do anything. So I don't.
Yeah, that's a good clarification.
I just want to make sure we state that directly.
Good clarification. I'll add another. Neither am I a bomb-throwing anarchist, nor am I a no gun on my hip peacenik.
Yeah.
The society I'm talking about will be very well armed, because there will still be conflict, and it just won't be a monopolistic state injecting conflict into every single instance of your life. That's the poisonous part.
Yeah, and that's a really, I appreciate that perspective. I was actually having a conversation with a guy in the Netherlands, and this was a young guy who was helping me kind of upgrade my Bitcoin setup. You know, I'm doing things the way I was doing things 10 years ago. So this guy was filling me in on some of the new technology, new ways of doing things. And at first he was like, you know, we're going through the digital stuff. And then he started to get into, well, do we need to talk about physical security? And he was like, where do you live? I was like, I'm in the US, I'm in Virginia. He's like, oh, okay, you're fine. You've got guns. And he was telling me, it's like in the Netherlands and most of Europe, especially now that they've opened the borders and let all these migrants flood in.
It's horrifying.
Yeah. He's like, man, they just break in the barn at night. They break in the houses at night. And he's like, for this, like he apparently has thought through a way to handle that, but they don't have guns. He's like, I'd love to shoot them, but we don't have guns. And I'm
they
like,
literally live under a state of anarcho-tyranny, where I do have an oppressive government, but they won't protect me from this. And if I try to protect myself, they will come and throw me in jail.
Yeah.
It's the absolute worst of all worlds. You'd be better off if the government just marched into the sea and left you alone to deal with the hordes by yourself. At least then you could.
Yeah. That was a comment. Oh, shoot. Was it Buckminster Fuller? Made the comment, this back like in the, I don't know, 70s, 80s, 60s, maybe even. But he was like a systems theorist. And he made the comment, you could take all the politicians and drop them in the sea, and not a darn thing would change with regards to economic productivity, you know? Something like that.
It would tick up, no doubt.
Of course, we would not advocate violence unless less aggressed upon, but I mean, one could make the case that we are being aggressed upon.
We'll persuade them to march into the sea somehow.
Great. Did we leave any stones unturned here? Is there anything else?
Just one. I noticed those sweet goldbacks you got on the wall behind you. Do you got any from Nevada?
Let's see. Which ones do I have? I've got one sitting right here, too. This one's I've got this one right here. I thought it was. This one's from Nevada. This is one, I haven't done this in a while, but at first when people would ask me about those, I'd hold them up to the camera and advocate, hey, go get these things. I love what they're I love the idea of what they're doing. This is something that I think is important. It's also why I like Bitcoin. The idea of private commerce, and the gold backs can enable that in a scale that 1 ounce gold coins at $4,300 an ounce cannot. Bitcoin's the same way. This idea that there's nothing stopping us from transacting with one another in private currency. I've got to know the local agriculture community here, and I can go buy local beef, local food, with these guys. And if they're willing to accept, would they accept Bitcoin? Would they accept, silver, whatever, and there's a great group I really like called Bitcoin Bay, a guy named Wes Schlemmer.
Yeah.
Established. You're familiar with Wes? Yeah, they're doing great stuff down in Tampa. They've got a local ranch down there. You can buy stuff with Bitcoin. They're all the local businesses. And that, in a sense, when we talk about the agency that we have at the local level, the more we can empower that, the better. And I think private commerce is one way to do so. So these things make me optimistic, even when, some of the other stuff is maybe less so.
Yeah, it's a bright future. We're just gonna have to wade through some stuff to get there.
Yeah, that's the human journey. One thing I'll share with you, because you mentioned, one side good, one side evil, and to be in this game, to be in this world, if you pick a side, you say I'm on the side of good. Your thought is, well, we got to get rid of evil. And I wrote something in my newsletter a while back, and it's something like the dark cannot survive the light, something like that. And one of our members sent me an email and said, Joe, I liked what you wrote this month, but I want to share something with you. And this was a lady out in Hawaii. And she said, there's this elder person here. She had a name for it. I don't remember what the name, but this elder lady in Hawaii told her that evil is in service of good. And she sent me that email. And at first I'm like, no, what? No. But then I thought about it. I was like,
In the minds of the evil person, yes.
That too. But I think the perspective this person was getting at is that if you didn't have evil, you couldn't have good. Because for something to be good, it must be good relative to something evil.
Sure.
And as I started thinking about that, I was like, that's pretty deep. But it makes some sense. Like if you have the perspective that life is just this human experience, it might make sense that you have to go through these struggles between good and evil. If we didn't have that, I think life would still be fun, but would, maybe not quite as,
Well, you could argue we wouldn't have human sentience if that were the case. I mean, I think Solzhenitsyn is right. The line between good and evil runs down the middle of every human heart. Maybe not the middle. And we have to grapple with evil, or we would not understand what good even is.
Yeah.
And I also think we don't have to conquer evil. We just have to stop doing it and stop cooperating with it. If we just step away from the political means and do only the private, well, they're just going to wither away and die, and we're going to prosper.
My friend Paul Rosenberg makes a great point. And when he says today, if you look at it, humans, so we know 2% of the population roughly are sociopaths. They have no capacity for empathy. And hopefully not climate, guys. Don't tell me that. But he says outside of that group, humans must be tricked into doing evil.
Right.
Nobody who's not a sociopath is going to willingly do evil. And if you look at instances in history where somebody did something that's, pretty bad, they didn't see themselves as doing something bad. They justified it to themselves, and they're doing so because they were fed some information.
And here's a great example. Satan whispers into the ears of economists the concept of a public good.
Yeah.
And now I get to use force on you, because if I don't, this public good won't get produced. So I'm not the evil one, really. Exactly. There's no such thing. Anyway, I appreciate you inviting me on. It's nice to hear you and see you, and instead of just reading you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time today. So before we part, tell us a little bit about Haman Nature and what you're doing with your Substack over there.
Right, yeah. Go to hamannature.com, HAMAN, nature.com. That forwards to my Substack. I put out articles or a podcast episode 5 days a week. I got stuff to say. Check it out. I've got 2.5 years worth of stuff going back. I podcast once a week with the great Bob Murphy. We do crossover episodes. If you don't know him, you should. Robert P. Murphy. And check out my YouTube channel. It's also called Haman Nature. Either put it in quotes or add Adam, or you'll get 500,000 iterations of a great Michael Jackson song and not my podcast.
We'll link to everything, too. So
Awesome.
We'll make it easy so you don't get all the Michael Jackson songs. Unless you want them.
He is the king of pop, but gosh darn it. So yeah, that's my stuff. Check me out. And thanks again, Joe. This was great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. It's great to get to know you a little bit here, and just really thankful for your time. So we'll leave it there. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Phoenician League. If you found any value in today's conversation, please subscribe to stay plugged into the network. We put out new episodes every week. And if something we talked about today made you think differently about money or investing, please leave a review and let us know. That helps the show reach the people who could really benefit from it. And remember, financial freedom does not start with money. It starts with understanding and a fiercely independent mindset. So if you would like to dive deeper into the topics we cover, I invite you to get on the Phoenician League email distribution list at PhoenicianLeague.com. We often send out detailed written analysis on the various investment opportunities and the asset classes that we advocate, and we connect the dots across what's actually happening in the global economy. And then we host online strategy sessions periodically as well, where we can really drill into how to take full command of your financial future. So stay connected at PhoenicianLeague.com. And until next time, let's stay smart and let's stay independent. This is Joe Withrow, signing out.